Hello, welcome to another edition of Security Africa. In the last episode, you were told that in this 21st century, it is becoming difficult for many African nations to secure their international borders or guarantee their internal security. This is because the security administrators are yet to understand the current security challenges they are facing. The security challenges being experienced in different African countries today are not mere security challenges. What is going on in Africa is an organized warfare covered by deception and executed through a web of proxy structures. That warfare has been identified as the 21st century warfare in Africa. You also heard that for this warfare to be defeated, it must be understood, defined, and then dismantled. For this to happen, the first thing you should understand is the nature and the characteristics of this warfare. So, in this edition, you will understand the nature of the 21st century warfare in Africa coming up next. Welcome back. So, what is the nature of the 21st century warfare in Africa? If you do a mind map of the crisis across Africa, from Egypt to Libya, Kenya to Somalia, Congo, Mali, Nigeria, and Central African Republic to Burkina Faso, you will discover that these crises have the same template. That template has 6 structures to create these crises across the African continent. Now the question is, what are these structures? Number 1 template is the structure of international paid proxy fighters that manifest as terrorists, armed bandits, kidnappers, cattle rustlers, and armed robbers, just to mention a few. The most dangerous of these fighters are the paid proxy fighters, who masquerade as religious extremists and ethnic militias. They are sponsored and brainwashed by foreign entities to destabilize targeted African countries. This is done under the guise of defending their religion, their enclaves, or their ethnic groups. Consequently, under different excuses, these groups have engaged in killings and destructions in many African nations today. Now the question is, what are the strategic agenda behind the killings of defenseless rural dwellers in different parts of Africa? It is surprising to note that these people just go into villages, remote villages, kill innocent civilians, destroy their villages, destroy their houses and their livelihood. Why would they want to destroy many African ancestral homes? How do they get their weapons? Who is training them? Are they acting alone? Who are their sponsors and trainers? Are they an organized, sponsored entity? These questions and hidden intrigues are part of the nature of the 21st century warfare in Africa. Number 2 template, the structure of majority ethnic or religious domination. Some African leaders today, from the majority ethnic or religious groups, tend to see power as belonging to their ethnic or religious groups. Sometimes, they see the ethnic or religious groups as the successors of the colonial masters. They see power as their rightful heritage, which must be retained at all costs. In this regard, therefore, they do everything to hold on to power, to the marginalization of other groups. This gets worse in a democratic setting. These African political leaders that have this kind of mentality pretend to use democracy, being the game of number, to exclude other groups in their respective nations. They will use their numeric advantage to create ethnic or religious political dynasty, thereby marginalizing other groups. This mentality and attitude is at the root of most of the security challenges across many African nations today. It is in the nature and character of the 21st century warfare in Africa to promote this kind of template, which in turn destroy the internal cohesion of the targeted African countries and therefore prevent them from engaging in nation building. And this is what is going on in many African countries today. Number 3 template, the structure of exploitation of African natural resources. This is the main issue. It is part of the nature and character of the 21st century warfare in Africa to destabilize African countries with huge natural resources. This will make it impossible for the affected African nations to develop using the earnings from these natural resources. Rather, the earnings of these resources are used to solve security issues. In most cases, armed militias or proxy fighters control the regions where these natural resources are found. So, instead of the affected countries being in charge of these natural resources, the exploitation is done by violent non-state actors who use the proceeds to expand their crisis and violence. Number 4 template, the structure that will undermine and remove legitimate state powers of African nations by non-state actors. The destruction of state powers of the African countries by non-state actors is a legitimate structure of the 21st century warfare in Africa. If you look around Africa, you will see lots of foreign-sponsored non-state actors trying to contest power or neutralize state powers of most African nations. This is to the extent that some African nations today indirectly take instructions from foreign-sponsored non-state actors in running the affairs of their state. Under this condition, therefore, it will be difficult to satisfy the aspirations of the citizens, which will lead to chaos, instability, and breakdown of law and order. You can see it happening in many African countries today. The implication is that if any African president takes instructions from these foreign organizations, the citizens will definitely rebel. If he refuses to take instructions from these organizations, that president will risk regime change, subversion, or insurrection within his country. So you can begin to understand how Africa has found itself in a very precarious position while these intrigues are alive and well in Africa. To contest and destroy legitimate state powers of African countries is a deliberate policy driven by structures of the 21st century warfare in Africa. Number 5 template, the structure that creates and equips violent non-state actors to contest the power of coercion with African nation states. When you look around Africa, you will see hundreds of armed militias who are desperate to neutralize and dismantle this defense and security architecture of many African states. It is a deliberate policy. In many African nations today, violent non-state actors have neutralized the security forces to the extent that they control territories, they collect taxes, and enforce their own laws to the knowledge and helplessness of the government and the security forces. Sometimes, these violent non-state actors are paid ransom by African governments. Some are promised state powers, others are promised money, all in exchange for peace. So why would a legitimate government, a national government, bribe or pay ransom to criminals who have the blood of their citizens in their hands? Why would they do that? This is because many governments across Africa have lost confidence in their security forces to guarantee the integrity of their territorial borders. So when a government starts begging terrorists or criminals for survival, it has openly acknowledged the superiority of the criminals, recognized their existence, recognized their legitimacy, and also accept its own weaknesses to protect its citizens. What a shame. It is an embarrassment to the security administrators of affected African nations. It is indeed a loud vote of no confidence on the security structures of such affected countries. Consequently, it has become difficult for many African nations today to secure their borders or guarantee the security of their citizens. Where did these violent non-state actors come from? Who is training them? Where are their weapons coming from? What happens when another criminal group emerges and asks for its own patronage from such African nations. Are African nations losing their Westphalian autonomy? This is the nature and character of the 21st century warfare in Africa. It is a deliberate policy that all these things must happen. Number 6 template, the structure of cultural subversion. The 21st century warfare in Africa has established structures for the subversion of African values and the imposition of globalist ideas based on foreign value systems. This alone has created serious security challenges across many homes, families, and communities in many African countries today. When you want to destabilize a country covertly, the first thing you do is to destroy their culture through subversion or substitution. This will destroy their traditions, customs, and value systems. Now the question is, what is the relationship between culture and national security? What is the relationship between customs, traditions, and national security? Now listen, when the traditions, customs, and value systems of any society is destroyed, what takes place is lawlessness. When the traditions, customs, and value systems of any society is subverted, there will be chaos within homes, neighbor relationship, the small communities, and the country at large. Most African cultures today have been undermined, subverted, or substituted. This is why there are so many security challenges in many homes, families, and communities in many African countries today. So African nations must be careful with foreign cultures and ideologies imported into the continent and spread through religion, television, music, cinemas, fashion, cartoons, or video games. As long as these ideas are foreign to the African culture, they will definitely destabilize the continent. It is a deliberate policy to destabilize Africa by destroying its culture and its history. So, from the foregoing, you can now begin to understand the nature and the characteristics of the 21st century warfare in Africa. You can also understand the 6 structures through which this warfare expresses its nature and characteristics. It is a deliberate policy to subvert the African culture in order to create lawlessness in the society. It is a deliberate policy to destabilize African nations that have abundant natural resources. It is a deliberate policy to allow non-state actors to undermine the state powers of many African nations. You must be careful and vigilant over the activities of foreign-sponsored organizations, whether religious or humanitarian. So, having understood the nature of the 21st century warfare in Africa, and also the templates of conveyance, what is the definition of this warfare? So don't worry. In the next episode, you will understand the definition of the 21st century warfare in Africa. So stay tuned on this channel. See you in the next episode. Make sure you don't miss it. Thank you for watching.